Rare weapons of World War II, Russian tech, rare Soviet light carbines, light pistol carbines of the Second World War. During World War II, the Soviet Union attempted to design their own lightweight pistol caliber carbine, very similar to the American M1 or M2 series of light carbines. So in this video, I'm going to explain or go over some of the rare pistol carbines designed by the Soviet Union during the Second World War. The first carbine designed by the Soviet Union was actually a modified version of a submachine gun designed in 1927, and that gun is the Tokarev model 1927 carbine. This weapon was designed sometime in the 30s, but the project was abandoned until the Battle of Moscow in 1941. During the Battle of Moscow in 1941, the German military was on the verge of reaching the actual city itself. So the Russians wanted more weapons to arm not only the Red Army, but they also wanted to arm some of these civilian militias or partisan units that were also taking part in the battle. One of the weapons they slightly mass-produced was the Tokarev M90 carbine, which was really just a 1927 submachine gun that had its barrel stretched out. This weapon was chambered for 7.62 by 38 millimeter rim cartridge, the same cartridge used in the Nagant model 1895 revolver. This weapon was fed by a 21-round box magazine and had a rate of fire of up to 1,100 rounds per minute. Some sources state that this weapon was select fire, so it was basically like an M2 carbine, but before the M2 carbine. Only 300 of these light submachine gun carbines or fully automatic pistol carbines were developed. Not many have survived, with the exception of the one in this photo and a few others that survived at Russian museums across Russia. The next series of semi-automatic pistol carbines was designed by Sergei Korovin. Korovin was a Russian firearms designer who was famous for his TKM-1925 semi-automatic pistol, which was used by the Soviet NKVD from 1929 during the 1950s. The first weapon designed by Mr. Korovin was the Ppsh-41. The Ppsh-41 was a prototype semi-automatic light carbine from 1941. This weapon was chambered for the 7.62 by 25 millimeter Tokarev cartridge and was fed by either an 8 to 15 round magazine. This weapon was designed right after the German invasion of the Soviet Union, also known as Operation Barbarossa, and this weapon was mostly designed at the time where the Soviet Red Army was falling apart and the Russian government requested more weapons for volunteer or for civilian militia and or partisan units. One of the first weapons to be designed was this gun, the Ppsh-41. This weapon was never produced. By the time this prototype was finished, the Ppsh-41 submachine gun had begun to be put into full mass production. The Ppsh-41, we all know, is pretty much one of the cooler Soviet weapons of the Second World War. This weapon was meant to free up weapons in the rearguard units as well, as the Russians were running out of weapons on the front line, especially small arms and tanks. This weapon was also meant to be used by Soviet tankers and by Soviet military contractors who were not frontline soldiers. Unfortunately, this gun was never adopted. It was pretty much abandoned. The next gun designed by Mr. Korovin was the Korovin TKB-270. The 270 was a prototype semi-automatic pistol carbine also designed in 1941. This weapon was chambered for the 7.62 by 25 millimeter Tokarev cartridge also, and was fed by a 10-round magazine. Some other sources state that this weapon may have been chambered for the 7.62 by 38 millimeter rim cartridge as well, but it is unknown 100%. This weapon also never made it past the prototype stage and was designed during a time period when the Germans were on the verge of capturing the Russian city of Moscow. But the Soviet Union by that point had produced so many Ppsh-41s and PPD-40 submachine guns that pistol carbines as a whole kind of seemed pointless. So Korovin, or Mr. Korovin, went back to the drawing board one more time and redesigned this weapon to be a more simplified light pistol carbine in the form of the Korovin model 1941, which was pretty much I guess, a more simple version of the previous guns, the previous two weapons. This weapon was also chambered for the 7.62 by 25 millimeter Tokarev cartridge and was fed by an 8-round box magazine instead. This weapon was specifically designed for Soviet tank crews and for rearguard units, or as a cheap substitute for the TT-33 pistol in case a Soviet soldier needed something more powerful. This weapon also came out at the same time that the U.S. military started mass producing the M1 Carbine series of semi-automatic pistol carbines. So yeah, this weapon also never made it past the prototype stage and was basically abandoned by 1942. You know. The next pistol carbine was designed by a gentleman with the last name Mayin. This was the Mayin Model 1. The Mayin Model 1 was a prototype bolt-action light pistol carbine from 1942. It was basically an even simpler weapon, though it was kind of, how you could say, it's more of a handcrafted weapon than the last Korovin weapon, which used more stamp/metallic parts than this weapon. The Mayin prototype rifle was chambered for the 7.62 by 25 millimeter Tokarev and could be fed by either a 10 or 30 round box magazine, or 35 round box magazine, or the box magazine used in the Ppsh-42 and Ppsh-43 series of submachine guns. This weapon was never mass produced or even put into production and was basically abandoned. Mayin would later go on to develop another carbine, the Mayin Model 2, which was a semi-automatic pistol carbine from the same year in 1942. This weapon was also chambered for the 7.62 by 25 millimeter Tokarev and was fed by either a 20 to 35 round box magazine. Again, this weapon was never adopted. The final Mayin prototype was the Mayin Model 3. This was a prototype semi-automatic light carbine from 1942-1943. Again, chambered for the 7.62 millimeter Tokarev cartridge, and again being fed by either a 20 to 35 round box magazine. This weapon was pretty much the final version. It was the most refined version of this weapon. I actually like this gun. It would have been better if this gun was a select fire submachine gun rather than a semi-automatic pistol carbine. But again, like the earlier two Mayin models, this weapon was also never adopted. The last pistol carbine designed by the Soviet Union during the Second World War is one I can't really find much info on, only a name. This weapon is known as the ZI-Doskum. This was a prototype semi-automatic light carbine designed between 1942 and 1943. Again, chambered for the 7.62 by 25 millimeter Tokarev and being fed by either a 20 to 35 round box magazine. I've been trying to find information on this gun, but I can't. It seems to have been based on the American M1 carbine, as the Soviet Union had gotten word of this weapon in 1942. So I don't know. I can't tell if this is a Russian attempt at creating their own M1 carbine or not. Not much is known about this rifle, and this is the only photograph I could find on it. So if you have any info on this gun, please tell me in the comment section below. That's pretty much it. These were the Soviet pistol carbines designed during the Second World War. Which one do you think would have been the best? If you ask me, my favorite of these pistol carbines are the Tokarev M90 27 select fire pistol carbine and the Mayin Model 3 or Mayin Model 3. Both of these weapons had great potential, and as a cheap semi-automatic pistol carbine or a semi-automatic weapon that could be easily used by a Soviet soldier or a Soviet partisan or Soviet military contractor or artilleryman or just regular civilians trying to defend themselves during an invasion. But unfortunately, with the exception of the Tokarev select fire carbine, most of these rifles, all the rest of these guns, were never put into mass production. These weapons are usually forgotten by Western and even Russian firearm experts today. So, what do you think of these weapons? Tell me in the comment section below, and until next time, this was J-Man Time, signing off.